Okay, there we go. All right, so we're just going to do the Imrei Yaakov on what we were learning yesterday, this long sif about the prohibition of keeping a paid promissory note in your possession. Once a debt has been paid, if you have paper that indicates that, you're not allowed to hold on to it. You have to destroy it, or really give it back to the debtor if at all possible. And if for whatever reason you don't want to give it back to the debtor, you have to be able to justify it. Sometimes there is justification, especially if let's say I want to use the parchment for thatching my roof or something like that. But I have to tear it up. I have to void it, cross it out, whatever I have to do in order to make it no longer a collectible instrument. Okay, so let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov over here. Asr lahashos shtar parua. You're not allowed to keep a paid promissory note. So he says, Lo v'shapar l'malva, ve'ein hamalva rotza lahachzir lo shtaro, yesh l'nadoso ad shiachzirenu lo. If a debtor pays back his debt and the creditor refuses to give him back his promissory note, then you should put that person in cherem. Yeah, in other words, like really the community should put pressure on this person. Lefisher over alav the divrei Kabbalah, the al tishkon bi'oholecha avla, because there's a word, a scripture from the prophets that you're in violation of, which says, do not keep a perversity within your tent. That was the pasuk that we quoted from Eov, right? And so it's not a deoraisa, but it's still something that you'll find in the words of scripture. So Isser zeh mayri gam hecha shehalo v'shosek ve'eno mevakesh ashtar. And this prohibition applies even when the debtor is a nice guy. He says, no problem, do whatever you want, I don't care, I know I've paid you back, but the prohibition still applies. In other words, I'm still a bad guy, even if, everyone's happy. O sherotza hamal v'liten lo hashtar el shemadchehu miyom liyom degam bazem menadino so sheyitain ma'ad. Or another scenario where the malva, the creditor, is a bad guy, is he says, I have to give you back your shtar. Like he acknowledges that he's got to do it, but he just keeps procrastinating. So that person should be put in cherem. If we see that he's just not doing it for whatever reason, we put him in cherem as well. Okay, so let's go on to the next piece. O machul, right? If you're not even allowed to keep in your possession a debt that has been forgiven. In other words, if I go over to two witnesses and I say in front of them, I hereby forgive the debt that Shimon owes me, then I have to destroy the promissory note at that point. I can't say, well, since I voluntarily forgave the debt, I can still hold on to the note. No, you can't. Once you forgive a debt, you have to destroy the note. In other words, even if the creditor forgives the debt and the debtor never paid him. Adin im pirao v'chazar v'lava al oso shtar avalei begeder zeh. And the same thing would be true if the debtor paid back the original loan and said, do me a favor, hold on to the note and let me borrow another $10,000. He says, Daharehu nifsal ve'en lo din shtar. He says, that's not kosher. You're not allowed to borrow on an old promissory note. So let's say the debtor pays him back the $10,000 and he says, you know what, hold on to the promissory note because next week I may be going into debt again and I may need to borrow another time. So he says, the hakaimalon, shtar shenichtav al halva'a echas v'nifra, eno yochol lachzor v'lilvosbo. Because we paskin that if once a debt has been paid and that first debt was recorded in a promissory note, you cannot use the same note to support a second debt that was not written for that second debt. And that's true even if there's no problem with the date. right? Even if, let's say, I borrow money from you at 9 in the morning, I pay you back at 10, and then I ask if I can borrow again at 11 a.m. So it's still you can't use, even though, and so therefore you could argue, well, what's the harm? The dating, there's no pre-dating of the debt. It's all the same date. Still can't do it. Because this piece of paper records a lien on property that has now been removed once the debt has been paid off. So you can't borrow a second time because the shtar is not enacting the shtar represents an old lien. You can't create a new lien on a shtar that represents an old lien. Lo rak mimishabdi elagam mibnei chari, the havalei chas b'ba'alma. And the shach even goes as far to say that even if the shtar states that it does not have a warranty, the shtar still is really just a piece of garbage. It has no legal standing whatsoever, because once the debt on that first shtar, on the first loan, was paid off, then it immediately negates the efficacy of the shtar. So even if you say, oh, well, I can cover all my bases, it's still, you can't use it. But up until now, all we've been talking about is a shtar that's signed by witnesses. But let's say it's an IOU that just the debtor signs, and there are no witnesses. Yesh omrim degam bazeh she'en gova ba'o ela mibnei chorim kol mokom nisbat el shibudo. So there we have a machlokas. Some say that once that IOU, the debt has been paid off, you can't use that IOU again, even if there's no lien on the debtor's property, etc. The yesh cholkom usvirlu the whole vein bo shibud nachasam ein shaykh lomer denim chal shibudo v'lachein choser v'lovabo. Some say that because there's no witnesses on it, so the witnesses are not lying because there's no witnesses on it, and it's the debtor's signature, and there's no new lien being generated on the debtor's property. So in that situation where it's a shtar without a warranty on his property, so then you could use it a second time. Okay, so that's the machlokas as far as an IOU that's only signed by the debtor.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what about a line of credit that when you need money, you take out, let's say you sign at the bank, for $10,000. You can pay back 2,000, but then you go back into the line and get another 1,000 and pay out 5 or another 3, et cetera, et cetera. So
Sure.
you're going in and out all the time.
Yeah.
Sure. How would that fit in with what we just learned?
Well, yeah, I mean, as long as everything is recorded, what the bank is essentially telling you when they give you a line of credit is that we're willing to lend you different amounts of money at any different time. So as long as, and they keep a record of every time you borrow money and every time you pay back money. So it seems, and the dates are recorded. So everything is it seems like everything would be kosher in that kind of situation, because you're not using an old note to borrow new money. It's the bank keeps a record of every single time you dip into the credit fund, and every time you pay back. So I don't see that there would be any problem in that situation.
Okay.
Do you want to follow up?
And if you, let's say, you pay back the $10,000, but you still have the open line of credit, you can go back into it. Is it a new document that you're using?
Yeah, because basically the bank says we'll continue lending you money as long as you like. Yeah, every single time that the bank gives you money that's not yours, they're giving you a new loan. You can borrow money multiple times from the same party, just as long as you have a separate shtar for each loan. That's really what's happening. Unless I'm mistaken, that seems to be what's happening when a bank extends you a line of credit. It's like, let's imagine that the bank was a private party, the Ruvain that we're talking about. Ruvain is your brother-in-law. He's your wealthy brother-in-law, and you go to Ruvain and you say, "Listen, I'm gonna need to borrow." So in January, you borrow 10 grand, and you have terms on how you're going to pay him back. And every time you borrow money from him, he records it in a new shtar. So that's, and then in February, you say, I'm going to need another 5,000. Fine. And then I'll start paying you back on each individual loan separately, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that, instead of Reuven, it's the bank.
So it's a new start. It's not an existing start that just keeps track of money
Right.
that goes in and out.
It would seem to me it's every time because they're creating a new record of what's going on, right?
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, keeping a ledger that can be, that it has to record every new loan, and it has to be, you probably either with witnesses or the debtor's signature saying that, has to write up a new IOU or however you're going to structure it. Yeah.
The line of credit agreement says explicitly that every time you use the line of credit, it's a separate loan on the same terms as the master agreement.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you hear that, Shmuel?
No, I didn't.
Yes, say it again. Marvin was saying that in the line of credit agreement, it says that every time you dip into your line of credit, it's a separate loan that conforms to the original terms of the general line of credit agreement.
Oh, interesting. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay. Va'afilu kasav alav shovar. And the truth is, we learned in the Rav Shulchan Aruch that even if the creditor presents the debtor with a receipt saying that it was paid, va'afilu kasav alav shover, ad sheyichdavenu al gabe hashtar v'hu sheparu akulo. Ad sheyichdavenu al gabe hashtar, period, sorry. He says, if the debt has been paid in full, you have to write on the shtar itself, paid or void or whatever you're going to write. It's not just enough to give the debtor a receipt. Now, why is it not enough to give the debtor a receipt? Dehol v'hashover olo lihei aved, v'lama lo lahashos hashtar etzlo b'chinam. He says because the debtor may lose his receipt. I mean, let's say, you could clearly create a scenario where that the debtor is a bit of a schlemiel and he's not good with paperwork. So you give him a receipt knowing that in all likelihood he'll lose it. And then you'll be able to use the promissory note a second time. But why? And furthermore, even if the guy's not a schlemiel, why should we require a debtor to hold on to paper when all that needs to be done is to destroy or just write across the promissory note, paid in full? Ach im kosef hashover al gabe hashtar atzmo leke isura. He says, if you write the shovar on the note itself, then there's no isser for the creditor to hold on to it. In other words, if it says paid in full and it's signed by the creditor, then there's nothing wrong with holding on to it. Then there's no longer a fear that he's going to use it a second time to collect with it. And so if the debtor says, yeah, it's fine, just write on it, paid in full, and sign your name and show it to me, then fine, you can hold on to it. You don't need to destroy it. Okay, so, okay. Now, then we said, he says, you don't have to return a promissory note unless it's been paid in full. He says, if even a small amount is still remaining on the debt that the debtor still owes you, you're allowed to keep the promissory note and give him a separate receipt. And the fact is, even if the lova trusts the creditor that after he gave him back, let's say 70% of the loan, he says, I don't need a receipt, it's fine. I know you're not going to come after me for the full amount. Then you're allowed to hold on to the promissory note in its original form. So what does that mean? He says, Kain hudas hashach ve'akor b'nesan al cholek alav. He says, however, the Rav Shulchan Aruch is just telling you one opinion, but the Korban Nisanel disagrees. He says that you always have to write a receipt, or like what Doug had suggested, at least record it on the note itself. On such and such a date, 70,000 of the $100,000 loan was paid back. In other words, that would really be the right thing to do. Okay. What you're not allowed to do is hold on to the promissory note if the debt has been paid in full and you claim, well, you haven't paid for the scribe, you didn't pay the lawyer's fee for the, you didn't, right? That's what we learned yesterday. Okay. And the reason is because since the debt that's recorded in the note has been paid in full, there may be a secondary obligation or a secondary debt, but that's not recorded in the note. And if it's not recorded in the note, you have no right to hold on to it. So that's what we saw yesterday. And the Imrei Yaakov says, Shahalova chayev l'shalim schar asofer afilu lova v'chule. He says, because as we know, the lova is the one who has to pay the scribe's fee. In other words, that's why generally people who borrow money are at a disadvantage. Because this is just one example. When you borrow money, you're at a disadvantage because you don't like to being under someone's thumb, right? But another reason is because you have to pay all of the out-of-pocket expenses to make this loan work. So for example, if there's transportation costs, if there's bank fees, if there's lawyer's fees to draft the paperwork, all of these things have to be paid by the borrower, not by the lender. Lender should not have, and it's only logical, the lender shouldn't have to incur expense if he's doing you a toiva and lending you money, right? The only thing that could be argued is that if it's a loan with interest and you're doing a heter iska, you're doing some kind of way of circumventing the prohibition of charging interest, maybe you could argue that they should split the costs because the creditor is benefiting as well. But if it's a straight interest-free loan, then the debtor really has to pay for all the fees that are associated with this loan. So Pirish Lomi Boy Bishtar Halva Shakol Hana'ohu Shel Halova. He says this is not only true with a shtar halva, with a straight interest-free loan, where the lova is the one who's getting all the benefit. So here he says, Ela afilu bishtar iska. He says, even if you're doing an iska, where the debtor is guaranteeing a return on the loan, where shachatzi harevach unosin lahamalva, where basically the way an iska loan is set up is as follows. I want to borrow from you $10,000, and I guarantee you to pay you back a 5% rate on the loan. So how do we structure it so that it's kosher? So basically the basic structure of the heter iska is that 5,000 of this 10,000 is an interest-free loan, and the other 5,000 is a business investment, and I'll pay you back 10% return on your business investment of $5,000. Yeah, so you're allowed to write that up. You're allowed to write that up. Yeah, that's how the rabbis were able to circumvent the whole issue of not charging interest on loans. And this is what's called a heter iska. This is done all the time.
They wanted to bring some inventory in from overseas, and money something like that, would it be the whole loan, if they ask you for a loan for that money to buy those goods, would you then be like a business partner to them and therefore take shares in the profit, or would that be interest?
Well, so it all depends. It all depends. If you're genuinely a business partner, and so let's say, Doug, I give you an offer. I say, if you give me $100,000, you'll become my business partner in my venture that I'm importing widgets from China. Okay. So if you're truly a business partner, you'll take a percentage of the profits, and you'll also have to absorb a percentage of the losses as well. So you said it goes both ways. The whole idea of a heter iska is that the lender is not willing to absorb losses on the business investment. And that's why it was structured this way. Half of it, half of whatever you give me, half of the 10,000 that you give me is an interest-free loan. The other half, I guarantee a return on your investment of 10%. No questions asked, regardless of what I end up doing with this money, even if I use it to pay for my son's wedding, I have to pay you a return on this business investment that you're placing in me, because we haven't said what the business venture is. You don't have to write in the shtar the nature of the business investment. You're just saying it's a business investment. So there have been, my friend Chuck Wagner, who's a member here at the shul, wrote actually a very interesting article where a person sued in secular court because this person didn't want to pay back an interest-bearing loan to another Orthodox Jew, arguing that they had written a heter iska. And the heter iska was such that it stated that it's a business investment. And in business investments, things can go south, and you have to be prepared to lose the money. So the person lost the court case because basically what you do when you write up a heter iska is that you say this is a guaranteed return on a business investment, and the courts, secular courts, don't view a heter iska as having the same status as a standard business investment. But technically, if a person were to argue, well, my business went bankrupt, the business is now closed, well, could they argue that? Yes, but is it something that can be enforced? Well, that's something that we'd have to learn if we go through the laws of Ribbis and discuss the whole principle of iska. But it's definitely worth exploring. And that's certainly something that we can look into as our next area of study. Okay. In any event, so he says, even in an iska situation where the lender, the creditor, is actually benefiting from this loan/investment, okay? Even in that situation, the borrower has to pay all of the expenses of all the paperwork and the legal fees. And that's what the Rav Shulchan means over here. He says that if the borrower, the creditor, the debtor rather, still owes money because of whatever costs were associated with this loan, mikol makom lo havi kenishar chayiv lo afilu pruta. Echas debo kaimelon shemutulakev kidaleo. He says, but since he paid back the debt in full, he just still owes scribal fees, let's say, you're not allowed to hold on to the note. Unlike what we said before, that if there's any amount of the debt outstanding, even a few pennies outstanding, the creditor can still hold on to the note. The shiny hacha shein halo v'chayiv lo misach hashtar atzmo klum. Because in the case we're dealing with now, the debt has been anything that was recorded in the shtar was fully paid. The only thing is that the debtor still owes fees. If so, then the amount in the shtar has already been completely paid off. Okay, v'chov shel schar hasofer habalei kasuv acher legamre she'eno la'akev hashtar chov ba'ad chov shechayiv lo mimokom acher. He says the scribal fees is a completely separate debt, not recorded in this shtar. So therefore, you can't use the shtar as leverage to make sure that he pays back the scribal fees. Bottom line is that you're never allowed to use leverage from one area of business or financial association to apply pressure to another situation. That was like your situation that you were talking about, Marvin, where what that guy did was completely against halacha, right? To try and leverage a business venture from that was completely unassociated with this debt, and try to use an already paid promissory note to leverage his partner in another situation. So that you're not allowed to do. And then we said, and a God-fearing person, but he says, v'yesh matirim, some people do permit, the mutter lo la'adam litvos davar acher shenimtza biyado al ma shechayv lo chaveru mitzad acher. The Shach does allow leveraging another debt, even if it's already been paid, to make sure that my friend pays me back what he owes me from somewhere else. But a God-fearing person should be machmir. Davar zeh sheyirei shamayim yachmir la'atzma matzinu nami b'tchilas achibur le'el siman aleph sif aleph ba'od. We've seen this principle that a God-fearing person should not try to be a shark in business. In other words, there are going to be situations where you might be able to find a heter to be able to behave in this way, where, yes, the guy paid me back, but I'm going to leverage the paper that recorded that debt to force him or to pressure him to pay me something else that he owes me, right? Which is what that guy did. Yes, you can find a heter to do that. But if you're a God-fearing person, you should not rely on that. Okay? And with that, we conclude. Yeah. So with that, we conclude our. Yeah, I think we're going to need to do some kind of. We're going to need to do some kind of siyum. Let's see. So I'm traveling next week. What I'll do is I will Linetter get a hold of that sefer. My son told me he knows where it is. And we'll go through the laws of inheritance. It's not going to take us a long time, maybe a few weeks. And then we'll get to work maybe on either Hilchos Tzedakah or the halachas of loans. We'll decide what we want to do at that point. Okay? All right. Mazel tov. That's really
Mazel tov. Thank you very much, Rabbi.
mazel tov.
Mazel tov, everybody. Mazel tov.
So to those who were with us, who was with us from the beginning? Who was starting?
I was, Rabbi.
Barry.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Mm.
Okay. So shkoyach Barry, you went through the whole sefer. What you Joby, you also?
Mm.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. So what we might do is, if we have, I will be here on Monday morning. So either we'll start that sefer Monday morning, or maybe we'll go back and start at the beginning of Imrei Yaakov, where he just referenced at the end of the sefer that we saw this whole idea about a God-fearing person being more machmir than is required. We'll take a look at that again and go back to the very beginning. Okay. So everyone have a wonderful Shabbos, and see you soon. Monday will be